What is up, Nerd Nation? Once again, it's your boy Trey, bringing to you another video slash podcast. And if you couldn't tell, we are moving rapidly into one of my favorite times of the year. It's fantasy football time. So first and foremost, Nerd Nation, let's get some things out of the way. Let's do our normal housekeeping. We've got a shift. We've moved into what I'm going to classify as season 2 of the podcast. And that's because I'm going to be primarily drilling down and focusing on fantasy football. 2019 NFL fantasy football season. So, we're going to be doing that for the remainder of the NFL season from now, prepping up to your draft through the NFL fantasy football season. I'm excited about it. It's a topic I'm very passionate about. I enjoy playing, and I want to bring that to you guys. Second thing, if you could not tell by the open, I'm going to be recording and putting these videos up on the YouTube. So definitely, if you haven't checked out my link tree, check out my link tree. Make sure that you see the YouTube link there. You can see my beautiful face, the Baron of the Bearded Brothers, live on YouTube. So we'll be putting these videos up on YouTube, as well as releasing the audio podcast format like we've been doing. The mock draft that is currently up on YouTube, I am actually getting ready to take the audio and move that into podcast form. So look forward to seeing the commentary from the first ever mock draft Monday going up on all the podcast formats. That will be updated. The RSS feed will be updated here this week with that audio. I'm working diligently on the video editing, so bear with me, YouTube. I know I'm not the greatest video editor, but I do want to put myself in another format, and I think that YouTube is a great way to do that. So we're continuing to grow our brand. I have our Patreon up and running. If you like what you see, if you like what we're talking about and what we're doing here, the Truckin' with Trey podcast, brought to you by Nerdy by Nature, please do go check out Patreon. All the support's welcome. Thank you guys who've already helped support the channel, helped support the growth. I want to send a shout out to one of my boys who sent me a sweet shirt, the Be Great brand, brought to you by Darius Ross, D. Ross from Central Texas, getting his brand up and going. So send some love to Mr. Ross for sending me the shirt. Want to make sure anytime that something is sent and I can wear it on a video, I do, and I want to make sure that we send the proper respect to those people that send me merchandise to wear or want me to support the brand. Definitely let me know. If you have stuff, please let me know. I will be more than happy to show it off on the air, just like the Be Great brand. Love the shirt. Thank you, Mr. Ross. Appreciate that. We'll continue to wear it, but I wanted to be sure and have it on the stream today. So one more time, video audience, check out that great shirt. Podcast audience, I'll make sure and throw a photo up on my social media of this particular shirt with the logo. It is a great shirt, so look forward to seeing that. But let's get right into it. We're going to talk about fantasy football today, but not necessarily players or anything to do with production or point scoring or anything like that. Today is the foundation. Today we talk about getting ready for your fantasy football league. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. And as always, YouTube audience, if you see something on the video and I don't mention that I'm sponsored by them, I'm not sponsored by them. So do not take that the wrong way. I am not sponsored. by any of the products you might see on the video unless otherwise disclosed by me. So I just enjoy smooth adult beverages. So fantasy football. Here we go. Before we get into anything to do with drafting, let's talk about where our minds should be as fantasy football players going into the 2019 season. Let's talk about what happens. And I'll tell you from personal experience, I start with just my fantasy football team name. This is the funnest part of getting a league back going, is how can I troll other members in my league and be creative and funny with the titles of my teams. So I think the very first thing, before we get into any preparation, any cheat sheets, anything like that, find yourself a good name. So last year I changed my name a couple of times, but the one that stuck about halfway through the season was Kicking It with Kareem. And I thought it was great. Sorry to poke fun at someone's misfortune. The fantasy football team names are just as fun as the actual game. I love coming up with new, exciting fantasy football team names. So first and foremost, get you a pen, get you a paper, get the creative juices flowing, Nerd Nation, and get you a solid fantasy football team name. Secondly, you need to look at your opposition. If you're playing in a redraft league, so there's some different league formats. There's Dynasty, where you're keeping players. There's redraft. New players come in and out every year. Find you a player to troll. Find you someone in your league that you can have fun at their misfortune, that you can talk trash to, and that's going to be okay with it. Don't pick the person that's going to get upset or butthurt over the fact that you're going to be pitching shade their way all season long. So come up with a good name. Come up with somebody that you're going to be able to entertain yourself by giving a hard time or giving a little bit of a rub or a rib to. That is more important is the community that you play in, the fantasy football community. And it's overlooked a lot of times. Fantasy football communities are great because it's this time of year. It's July when most people are starting to reactivate those leagues, check with all their GMs, make sure that they're coming back, fill spots that may be vacant, get any changes in the point scoring system, get any changes in the waiver wire. Any of that is all done around July. That way, when preseason hits, you know your format, you know your teams, you know who you have in there, and you can draft accordingly. So I think that it's very important to find someone that you can poke fun at and have a good time with in your league, because the community environment is what makes fantasy football so great. Returning players, getting to wield the championship trophy, or in my case, the championship ring, which is what I have from 2017, which I do enjoy throwing it in everybody that played in 2017's face in my personal league that I play in every year. I wear it to work. I put it in their face. I make sure that they know they're dealing with the champ. So they're dealing with the champ. So that's where you can have some fun. And you can grow those relationships, and you can talk about community and different things like that with fantasy football. And that is where the bullshit ends. Pardon my French. And this is where, in the preparation stage, in the foundation for your 2019 fantasy football season, this is where we get into, you need to know your stuff. People that have been playing fantasy football for a while, you know what I mean. You keep your phone tuned to the ESPN notifications. You keep your phone tuned to the Bleacher Report, so that you know during this offseason what is going on and how it affects the landscape and the drafting of fantasy football. So delicious. Every time I take a sip, it's just delicious. So as I sit here and I indulge myself on some adult beverages and I talk to you guys and I let y'all know where my mind is at as a fantasy football champion in the past and as someone who loves the process of getting ready for fantasy football. I have a few resources that I go to and I go to regularly. And for anybody that's in my league, I'm going to kind of let y'all in on a little secret. And I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm cocky. So I want to let y'all know what resources I use when making decisions. I'm not going to tell you that there is a end-all, be-all resource that I use. There are several places I gather my information from. I take what I feel and what I've seen with the information of some industry professionals, and I make the best educated guess I can prior to the season starting. So first and foremost, find you some websites or cheat sheets or other industry leaders that you believe in what they say and make an educated decision. Don't take one as gospel. You need to be looking at several. So, of course, the most common source for sporting news and information is ESPN. And ESPN has some great analysts. They have the Phil Yates of the world and the Matthew Berrys of the world who have great insight. And they do put out extremely good content. Hats off to ESPN's fantasy division. Hats off to ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports, for understanding that fantasy football is extremely popular and actually putting broadcasts on national TV for fantasy football players. I love that. When I started playing fantasy football, you didn't have the fantasy football shows before the NFL actually kicked off on Sundays. And so it's great to see that that's recognized. It's great to see that there's a market for us fantasy football players. So one source that I do enjoy is Phil Yates and Matthew Berry's perspective on fantasy football. Now, I will tell you, I have been burned by Matthew Berry several times. He is not an end-all, be-all. This is where you need several resources that you pull your information from and then add your own insight into it to make an educated decision on what to do. So ESPN definitely has a lot of great content, a lot of great videos. It is one of the, if not the largest fantasy platform most people play on. Another great resource that I use is going to be Bleacher Report. So Bleacher Report, oh yeah, you heard that, right? Down the hatch, ladies and gentlemen. Bleacher Report also has great content and great insight. But I use Bleacher Report differently than I use ESPN. So I use Bleacher Report for more of a team standpoint, for more of a someone's going to get suspended. Bleacher Report is pretty dang good on getting that information out there quicker than ESPN. I have seen things pop up on Bleacher Report prior to them popping up on ESPN. So when it comes to team, not necessarily fantasy football, but the team side of it, I do enjoy Bleacher Report's content. I do enjoy how fast they put their content out. When it comes down to individual player analysis, ESPN has a very good platform, and they have very timely articles and pieces about the players that you're interested in drafting. The player is one piece, but you need to be looking at the team aspect, because a team that throws the ball 75% of the time, you probably want to steer away from the running back situation unless it's a pass-catching running back. So these are the type of things that you can draw educated decisions from. So now I'm going to get into my cheat sheets. Now, where I get my actual average draft position, my ADPs throughout the offseason as mock drafts are going on and they're updated, Where I get my ADPs per player is from the Fantasy Pros website. Fantasy Pros website is a great tool, and it actually has a wonderful format that you can break down by position on the fly. The Fantasy Pros website is completely free. There's no paid subscription for it. In fact, all of the platforms that I'm going to discuss today in preparation in that foundation side of getting ready for your 2019 NFL drafting situation, they're all going to be free, because I feel like you can pay for premium content, yes, but there is a ton of resources that we can use, plus our own insight, to make these decisions. Fantasy Pros is a great example. I love the fact that I can look at per position, I can sort by average draft position, and I can see if a player is trending up or down prior to my draft. This allows me to do a few different things. It's going to allow me to kind of guess on a trending player or a player I might believe in that is falling in average draft position. Allow me to make a little check mark and say, hey, when this comes around, if this player falls to me, I feel he's a better value than where he's at, vice versa. So fantasypros.com, great website. It's got a ton of cheat sheets, and they are all by position as well as overall. I use Fantasy Pros primarily for the average draft position, because when I am preparing for my fantasy football draft, I am looking at value. You do not win your fantasy league on draft day, but you can sure as hell lose your fantasy football league on draft day. So there's some preparation that goes into being ready for your fantasy football draft. Now, this is the one that's the kicker. This is the one that I've used for years. I'm actually a member of their community. I think that they have some great insight. During the fantasy football season, they put out a podcast 5 days a week and a DFS podcast. And that's the Fantasy Footballers. This is the one that hurts me, because this has kind of been my hidden gem for me in my league. And so putting this out there could cause me to have to go against people that are just going to be as educated as me. So when I told y'all that I'm cocky, the reason I am creating this video, the reason I am putting this out there, and people in my fantasy football league possibly will watch this, I don't know. Kind of torn. I would love to get the views. I would love to get the listens. If they do not, oh well. If they do, and I'm not good enough GM to make the right decisions, I don't deserve to win my league. I'm not saying that the Fantasy Footballers podcast is the cheat code for fantasy football. But I will tell you, based on their information from their weekly podcast the past 2 years, I have won and finished third in my fantasy football leagues respectively. They have a great insight. They have a great pulse on what's going on with fantasy football. They're great content creators. So if you haven't checked out the Fantasy Footballers podcast, now would be a great time to go listen to them as you get ready for the fantasy football year. So shout out to the Fantasy Footballers. The product they create is awesome. Love it. I am a member of the Foot Clan. I love the name because I'm a big nerd. If you couldn't tell by the Truckin' with Trey series and the Nerdy by Nature show, your boy Trey is a big nerd. So the Foot Clan is a direct reference for me to the Ninja Turtles, and I love it. So I am a member of the Foot Clan, and I do enjoy the content they create. I think they have some great insight. And this time of year is when their product ramps up. And they go through and give some great insight on breakout players, people to avoid, average draft position, mock drafts, complete divisional breakdowns. So that's the part that scares me. I'm going to give people information that could possibly come back and bite your boy in the butt. I hope not. I hope not. But who knows? As we sit here on the football field in my comfy lounge chair, YouTube, shout out to y'all. Podcast Nation, I've got a beautiful picture of a football field behind me as we prepare for fantasy football. So these are the resources that I use to draw my conclusions for where I want to draft people, how I feel about teams, what teams I'm going to avoid or fade, what players I'm going to avoid or fade, what players are sleepers, what players are breakouts, who can I take a flyer on, when is a good time to take a player, what round, how is this going to work out. So this brings me to the next to last point for this particular video / podcast. And that is, do your mock drafts. I think mock drafting is super important. It's just like any other event or sport that you do. You need to practice to be better at it. So why not practice at drafting fantasy football? I think that is what gives you the versatility. If you're not doing mock drafts and you approach a situation where in the first 3 rounds you've gone running back, running back, running back, and you have no idea where value is for your wide receivers and where to draft your quarterback and who you have targeted in construction of your team, and that puts you in a big oh crap moment during your draft when you're on the clock and you're scrolling through there and you're looking at players. This is where, if you haven't done a mock draft, maybe you don't know what your mindset, how you should pivot, where your mindset is at based on construction of your team. I'm never going to tell anyone draft position. I'm going to tell you draft what you think is the best value. That's worked for me in the past. I plan on doing it again this year in our fantasy football draft. But you need to know and you need to practice what happens if your target player doesn't make it back. And that average draft position, you have that Green Bay homer that's going to take somebody way above average draft position, or you have the Dallas Cowboys fanboy who's going to take somebody way over average draft position. What happens? How can you adjust? What value do you find? To me, the most important rounds in fantasy football drafts are the middle rounds. After round 5, before round 11, that to me is where you create the backbone for your team. You should be pretty well set if you're doing mock drafts for the first few rounds of your fantasy football draft. You should have encountered anything crazy that might happen in front of you and be prepared for that. This is where average draft position comes into play. This is where knowing who your potential target sleepers are. This is all of these things play into where you draft and what is drafted in front of you. And the second thing I want to talk about with mock drafting, challenge yourself. It's easy to say, I'm going to take the number 1 pick overall, but that might not be the draft position you're in. So I try to take positions that are traditionally harder to draft from. I want to challenge myself during a mock draft, just like in practice of any other sport. Challenge myself to think critically and quickly. So drafting, sometimes people say in a 12-team league, 8 to 10 is terrible draft positions. Those are the positions I want to draft from. Those are the positions I want to challenge my team construction. And then go back and review your draft. The mock draft, if you watch my previous video, Look at the bye week situation. I was not focused at the time on the bye weeks, and my bye week situation, if that had been my team, would have been terrible. Bye week 11 and 12 would have killed my team had it stayed together the way that I drafted it. So review what you do. Make decisions. Look, you don't like the way something went out. I feel like I reached for someone. Evaluate that. Go back and look at what rounds you drafted, what positions, and try to make yourself a better drafter. Like I told you, drafting a fantasy football team does not win you a league, but it sure as hell will lose you a league. So be cognizant of that. You are creating the skeleton for your team, but it is a season-long game, unless you play DFS, which that's for a different time. We're not going to get into that today. It is a season-long game. So this is where you set the backbone or skeleton for your squad. And I think it's important that we say that we say, hey, you're not going to win or lose your league. You're not going to win your league by having an amazing draft, but you can lose your league by making some bonehead decisions. So, get a good name. Find someone that's going to be okay with being trolled. Use your resources. Start to accumulate data from multiple sources, and then use what you think is going to happen. Make an educated decision. There's not one source out there that's gospel, like I said previously. And then prepare yourself. I think mock drafting is very important for that. Prepare yourself. And lastly, before we end this amazing podcast, make sure that you check your scoring system. I will not get into waiver wire discussion because I think that there is an amazing system out there for the waiver wire that takes waiver wire priority off of the table. I would prefer every league to go to a fab system where you spend virtual money on the waiver wire instead of a priority situation based on if a team has won or lost and their record and how many transactions they made. I don't like that. I don't like that waiver wire priority situation. But check your point scoring system. The reason it is vital at this stage, once your league is active, is to check your point scoring system, because a full point per reception league versus a standard league versus a half point per reception league versus a league that gives you a partial point per rushing attempt is going to affect the players you have targeted. So make sure, and this is the vital thing, make sure you know the point scoring system and the roster format so that you can, when you mock draft, and this ties right back to preparation, when you mock draft, you are mock drafting in the right format. And you're valuing your players in as close an environment as you're going to have when you actually sit down to draft your team. Nerd Nation, thank you for sticking with me. YouTube, thank you for sticking with me. I'm super excited to be doing the YouTube thing now too. So if you can't tell, please go check out the YouTube channel. Like I told you before, there are a ton of ways to follow your boy Trey and support the content creation I'm putting out there. So thank you guys on the podcast format. Thank you guys on the video format. Thank you guys for any of the support. If you have any comments, suggestions, concerns, or want to see a specific type of content created by yours truly, please feel free to let me know. Hit me up on social media. I'll be more than happy to take that into account. And as always, if you enjoy what we do, the best thing that you can do for some small-time podcaster, content creator, is share my content with anyone that you think might enjoy it. That's going to be the biggest and most valuable thing for us. So from the Truckin' with Trey podcast, and the Nerdy by Nature show. Welcome to the 2019 fantasy football season. And guys, welcome to season 2 of Truckin' with Trey. What's up, Nerd Nation? I want to thank you guys for staying tuned to the end of today's episode. And as always, thank you for liking, following, and subscribing, which allows us to continue to create these delicious podcasts for you guys. And we'll see you all on the next episode. This is Trey. Stay nerdy, my friends.